Hi, everyone, and welcome back. So, today I wanted to do a couple of things. First and foremost, I wanted to try out a new light that I have next to the camera here. But I did hear the feedback, and I did know myself I wanted to improve that, so I got myself a light, and hopefully I look a little bit better to you this time. So, something I wanted to talk about that I thought was kind of neat, especially as I've noticed in my astrophotography groups regular meetings, is a lot of times we're taking pictures of the same things in a month, right? Because a lot of this is all up at the same time. And everybody has a different take on it, a different view on it, and it's not always because you have a different telescope or a different filter or a different camera, or even that someone processes something much better than someone else. A lot of it comes down to the choices that people are making, and I wanted to focus in on what drives some of the choices that I've made in some of the images that I've taken over the last few months here. I'm not going to go through more than about 4 or 5 of them, but I think it's a neat exercise to think about. What are your goals? You want to set a goal for any image that you have, and sometimes you set those goals after you've stacked it all together and you see what you have, and sometimes you set those goals before you even go out to acquire in the first place. So what I want to do here is go ahead and switch over, and I'm just going to double check that I'm looking at my screen. Yep. Switch over to PixInsight here, and I'm just going to walk through some images. So I'm going to start going backwards here on one that I took several months ago of the California Nebula. So this one is, it's still one of my favorite images I think I've ever taken. But if you notice, first of all, it's just black and white. This is not a color image. And one of the reasons for this is that this was soon after I got my monochrome camera, and I was testing out the hydrogen alpha filter. But also, this particular target is almost entirely hydrogen light anyways. So it's very, very, flat red for a lot of people when they're taking color images of this. And for me, one, I didn't want to mess with a full narrowband combine when I didn't think I was going to get a lot of good info. And then two, after that, I was just kind of playing around, seeing what I could get. And to start off with, this was, the stacked set of subs when I got them there. So I went from this image to this one here. And, for me, when I first pulled up this image, the thing that jumped out to me was that I definitely got it, but it felt flat. I wanted to bring a lot of depth to this image. And one of the things I've heard mentioned a few different times in different places is that really what drives depth in an image is your contrast, your different levels of that kind of dynamic range between the very bright and the very dark areas. And so that is really what I was focusing on. So I wanted to kind of have a lot of contrast in it, but also if you notice these kind of dusty areas here, this isn't just background sky like it might be over here. This is actual dark dust that's in there. So I really wanted that to jump out as well. And so, looking at the final image here, you can see that's what I spent my time on, right? I wanted to get the darks to really be dark without feeling like they were just jet black cutouts. And then after that, focusing a lot on making sure that the kind of dynamic range in these wispy cloud areas that over here are fairly flat would really be striking and come out. This isn't the cleanest image I've ever made. It's not the most well noise reduced, but just focusing on those areas of kind of the dynamic range and contrast when I'm doing my processing, most of which is done through curves, and things like that, to try to make the blacks here that are really sky black a little bit darker than the blacks here in that dark dust, and then getting the right range in there. So that was my goal, and that really drove every change I was making along the way, and helped me have kind of an image in my head that I was working towards, with a plan of how to get there. So next one I have is a color one of the Iris Nebula, and this one was one that I took when I was out at a dark sky site, and really I only had about an hour at the end of the session before the sun was going to come up, that really wasn't being allocated to any other time. So I said, well, let's take some pictures of the Iris, because this one is not an emission nebula. It's not normally something you can do from the backyard in a light polluted area easily, to get all the data you might want to get. So I just kind of pointed my scope toward that and got what I got. And what I saw when I first pulled it up was this image here. And for me, I knew, this central area is kind of what a lot of people think of when they think of the Iris. But as I pulled it up, and I had seen kind of in some of the preview kind of sky atlas images, that there's a lot of dust activity in this area. And a lot of times with the Iris, you kind of just see what's going on around the Iris itself. So with the framing I had, I really wanted to focus on the dust. And so, you can see from like the original one here, I've got some pretty high sky background levels in order to bring that dust out. So I knew that I was going to have to be doing trade-offs here. The blacks in here were not going to be as dark as what I had in other areas. This image was going to end up being more stretched than what I was normally used to. And so, I could have done some more things to mask this out to kind of keep this from getting blown out. But that's what I was focusing on here. That was the as I've heard Adam Block say before, was the story I wanted to tell with this image. It was the dust in here. But similarly, I'm still, this stuff that would be pure black in almost any other image that might be processed a different way, if you're really trying to focus on some of these areas, I didn't want it to go to black, right? I wanted to show that this was dust that had variation in it, that kind of thing. And so that was what drove me through my processing steps on this one. Well, the next image here, this one's an interesting one of the Lagoon Nebula. So I'm going to start actually in this case with the raw kind of stacked files that I had here for each channel. And so this I was shooting in narrowband because I was shooting it from the backyard, right? And narrowband on the Lagoon, especially in HA, gets you a lot of detail, right? And on each one of these, it's also a great target in that it's really different kind of filter to filter. So HA versus the S2, there's still a lot of S2 in here, but it's very different on what's coming out on that one. And similarly with the O3, right? There's differences between all of these, and what that adds up to is a lot of great variation in color that you can get. And for most of us that have seen the Lagoon from just a normal color image, you can tell it's normally very red, very pink, with some white in it, depending on how far you go. And with narrowband, sometimes, you can get a very specific look. A lot of people do the Hubble palette, which tends to put things very green, or if you shift the colors up, they're very orange on the hydrogen and that kind of thing, and leads you to blue being the O3 sometimes, or different things like that. So you end up with, if you go with like a bicolor or something, maybe you end up with something that's a little bit more natural looking, but then you're looking kind of reds and blues, that kind of deal. And more than anything else, when I was taking this, I was going, I've seen a lot of lagoons this year. I want to try to do one that looks a little different. I didn't want to just end up with the same kind of shot that I've seen in a lot of different places, especially because for this target, I really love the full normal true color on it. And so I was just kind of playing around, thinking of it in different ways. And so for me, what that told me is I probably didn't want to do the standard Hubble palette where I'm putting the S in the red channel, the H in the green and the O in the blue, that kind of thing. I wanted to play around with different ones, and that's really what I did. So for me, I was focusing a lot on different ways to combine these together. Maybe the O was going to be the red channel or something like that. And then the other thing that I did was I made sure I was trying out a starless procedure. So there's ways that you can do it in PixInsight through like morphological transformation or something like that. In my case, there was a plugin that can run as a separate program, but that I downloaded and set up in PixInsight called StarNet. And I think I've kind of talked about this in other places. But basically in the plugin here, you do the stride, which is kind of the chunks of the image it's going to go through at a time, and you run it on the image, and it's going to do its processing and go through and actually point by point pull the stars out of the image. And in this case, this was what came out on the HA data. And in general, in a lot of these nebulas, HA may be what you use for luminance. It's pretty much what I did in this one. But you can tell, once you get the stars out of there versus the original kind of image here. And let me just set these to be. There we go. When you set these to be the same size, now granted these are stretched to a little bit different levels, right? But once you have the stars out of the way there, you really get a lot more kind of access and good visibility into these dust lanes. So when you do your stretching, you can be a little bit more aggressive with it without having to worry about blowing the stars out. And so I really wanted to have that so that similarly to with that HA image, I could really bring out some dramatic detail in the clouds without having to worry about the stars at all. So once I'd done that, I started playing around with the different color combinations. And that was when I came up with this one, which is instead of SHO, which is kind of the Hubble palette, where, instead of, for each of the R, G, and B channels, it's, the S, the O, and then the H in that case. I really liked this one, probably because I love the Joker as a Batman villain. So I've always been a fan of purple, blue, and green combined. But I really liked this color. It seemed very striking, very different. And so as I was kind of processing that through, I was like, oh, this one might be a good one. And then at the same point in time, just trying different combinations, I ended up with this OHS one here. And this one, the more I played with it, the more and more I really liked the difference in color. And so just kind of looking at the two here, for me, what I found was that, something about the way that looking at the yellows, the oranges, and the reds in here, the detail just stood out more to my eyes in that one than it did over here in the blue and purple one. At the same point in time, I really like this color combination. So in my case, I just finished them both and put them both out there for people to look at. But the consensus in general has been that this one's probably the more striking image of the two. And I agree with that 100%. But for me, once again, my focus coming into this was I want to do a view of this that I haven't seen everywhere before, right? And this definitely fit that bill. Just playing around with how I was combining those colors together really made a difference in the final result here. And even though I have both of these because I like both of these, this one is really the final of this. And even to the point of, this kind of slight purple on the outside, I think was a little bit more pure greenish. And I used color mask and then slightly adjusted kind of the colors around to get a little bit different. But that was the focus here. Now still trying to get good depth out of it and all of that, but I wanted striking color. And that was the goal with this one. And so the last one is my recent Andromeda picture, which honestly is probably one of the best color pictures I've ever taken. It's got a lot of sharpness, a ton of detail in it. It's also got hydrogen alpha added into it for kind of the red jump outs here. I took this, the RGB data when I was at a dark site, and I took the hydrogen alpha from the backyard and combined those together. And overall, I just love it. I'm definitely going to get this one printed out to hang up on the wall, that kind of thing. And I don't want to restart now. Let's have that go away. So I love it, I love it, I love it. But it took a decent amount of work to get it here. This was kind of the color combine after doing kind of DBE on the background extraction on the individual color channels, and there are some issues that I had to clean up right away, like the fact that I had a lot of blue halos around my stars. It's just kind of an artifact of my filters, and that's fine. I knew I was going to do that to begin with here, but really the thing I wanted to really show is looking at the core here. So this is the same image, let me rotate it around just so that it looks a little bit more lined up. So this is the same image, right? But the difference is really in the goals, Now, granted, you can do a lot just in curves to kind of get more dynamic range, but I've seen a lot of folks that are really focused on trying to get these dust lanes here to come out and be as striking as possible. And to be fair, I certainly did a fair amount of that, right? But for me, what I wanted was I wanted this to have a little bit more of a three-dimensional effect kind of coming around here, and not be just kind of a flat glow throughout the whole thing. So that for me meant that I was going to focus on some of the color differences and that contrast again, and less about making these jump out and more about kind of, I don't know how better way to describe it than the fluffiness around it, right? Not being a haze, but feeling like they're actual tangible things that you could almost reach out and touch. And then the other part was about not blowing out the core. I knew there was a lot of detail in here because unstretched, I'm not saturated on the center point. And as long as I'm not saturated on that center point, then I know all of the data level in between around this point is going to be there, and the question is just bringing it out. So in that case, this involved a lot of working with the HDR medium scale transform process, which in here is the HDR multi-scale transform, sorry. And then processes like the local histogram equalization, and that kind of thing, and just playing around with them in subtle ways to get to the point where I was bringing down the brightness here without it just purely looking like a single star. I wanted to still show that it is the bright center of the galaxy, but not have it be overwhelming the whole thing. But that's my Andromeda. Your Andromeda might be completely different. Yes, everyone's probably going to want to make sure they can show some detail in the center here, but some folks are going to want this to be a little bit more bright, right? They're going to want to have the center of the galaxy feel as impactful as it is, right? And that's perfectly valid. On the other hand, some people are going to want to stretch every inch, every pixel of detail out that they can possibly get in these areas and that area. So they might really squish down this brightness even more to bring out some of these areas, and sharpen it up a lot more to get a lot more detail in there. That wasn't my goal, right? Beautiful images can be made either way. And in some cases, many people may really like the kind of ethereal, almost ghostly quality of the initial image. And that is not wrong. The beauty can be found in any of those ways. What I'm trying to get across is, for me, when I'm making my decisions, I pick certain things in the image and I try to lock in on those being the thing I'm going to really work on the most. So, if I'm wanting this to stand out in a three-dimensional context and I want that interior detail to show up, then I know I'm probably going for a fairly dark background around here, right? There's plenty of other Andromedas where, with the HA type data, they're trying to bring out kind of the red hydrogen that kind of surrounds this area. Totally valid. But I'm going to darken mine up. I'm going to try to bring in a lot more color because I like that color variation. I don't want it to be as white as what it kind of more truly is on its own here. But I don't want this to be like a deep dark blue with this kind of being orange in the center here. So I'm going to bump it up, but I'm going to keep it in check. At the same point in time, I really like that detail, so I blew out the saturation on the red spots there. Those are really standing out more than other people might do, and so those are the things that I'm running at when I go through these. And so I hope that by going through this and kind of seeing what drives some of my decision making, which allows me to kind of put a plan together in how I'm processing, I hope that helps you on thinking about how you might go through putting plans together on your own stuff. These images were taken over the last 8 months, and for the most part, they're each at different skill levels. This one, I was just super happy that I had fairly round stars. I was still getting used to the new camera, used to the focuser, and how everything was working there. And so I didn't want to push having to combine a bunch of stuff together. Let me just deal with the hydrogen alpha. This one, I've got a limited amount of time. Just take some quick, color images of something. Then when I get back here, really going, oh, that's interesting. I wonder how much I can bring out from that. Moving into this one, I knew I was going to capture the data well. What can I do with it that's interesting and new to me that I haven't seen everywhere? And then this one, man, I've taken pictures of Andromeda over and over again over the last couple of years here. How can I really try to see how I can do my best on it for what I've learned in the gear that I have now as well? What are the parts that interest me the most about this object that maybe I haven't been able to capture as well before, like some of the outer kind of areas here, and really showing that they are defined in the image. And then how do I get this detail in as well, since I know I wasn't overexposing on it finally, because there's been many times over the last few years where I have overexposed the center like you wouldn't believe. So that's my thought process. I hope that's helpful to you. I hope that I'm visible to you with the lighting and stuff here. And I encourage you guys to not always judge your image against the image of the person next to you. Either on a Facebook group or on Astrobin or Flickr or something, or if you're going to an actual in-person astrophotography group meeting. I probably saw 3 different Andromedas, in the last meeting, and they were all pretty good, and they were all done with different points of view on them. The object itself isn't changing night to night out there, but what is different is us. If I just wanted to see the Andromeda Galaxy, there are much better technical pictures that have been put out there. But not only is this one mine and I have the enjoyment of I took it myself, I also know that it has the point of view that I wanted to put on it. The things that I wanted to bring across, I was able to bring across. And that brings me a lot more enjoyment out of the final image, even in the cases where I didn't process it that great. if it came out okay, but it came out okay looking at the things I wanted to look at, then I ignore some of the rest of it a little bit more. And it just helps me enjoy the image more. So I hope it will with yours as well. That's it for this time. So until next time, I wish everybody clear skies. Thanks.